We begin with a juxtaposition that defines the modern era of geopolitical delusion. At this very moment, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the eyes of the entire Western media establishment are fixated on the palm trees and polished marble of Palm Beach, Florida. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky are meeting at Mar-a-Lago. The narrative, currently being spun by the mainstream press and echoed by the diplomatic corps in Washington, is one of negotiation, leverage, and finding common ground. We are even hearing absurd reports that Zelensky is entering this conversation claiming to be 90% of the way toward a strategic understanding with the incoming administration. The optics are carefully designed to suggest that the fate of Eastern Europe is being decided in a gilded conference room in Florida, amidst handshakes and photo opportunities. But I am here to tell you without hesitation that this is theater. It is a pantomime performed for an audience that refuses to acknowledge the truth. While they drink coffee and discuss victory plans in the comfort of Florida, the only reality that actually matters, is taking place 5,000 miles away in the freezing mud and blood of the Donbas. And that reality is not just grim, it is catastrophic. We are witnessing a strategic disconnect of the highest order, perhaps unprecedented in modern history. The political class in the West, trapped in their echo chambers, believes that words, agreements, and political maneuvering can somehow alter the trajectory of a high-intensity war. They believe that narratives create victory. But war, fundamentally, is a kinetic equation. It does not care about narratives. It is about industrial capacity, manpower availability, logistics, and the ruthless physics of the battlefield. And on that battlefield, the physics are undeniable. The armed forces of Ukraine are not merely losing, they are in the process of a systemic collapse. We have entered what I call the critical terminal phase of this conflict. For months, I have warned my viewers that wars of attrition do not end slowly, they end suddenly. I warned that when the break comes, it will not be linear, it will be exponential. We are now seeing the pace of Russian operations accelerate in a manner that confirms the Ukrainian defense belts are no longer functioning as cohesive units. The Russians are moving further and further west, capturing fortresses that held for years in a matter of weeks, and they are doing so against an adversary that is hollowed out, exhausted, and incapable of maneuvering its reserves, because those reserves no longer exist. If you are looking at Mar-a-Lago for answers today, you are looking in the wrong direction. The outcome of this war was decided long ago by the unchangeable fundamentals of demographics and industrial warfare. The meeting today is irrelevant unless it results in a total recognition of defeat. If President Trump believes he can use leverage to force a stalemate or dictate terms to Moscow, he is being misled by the same intelligence agencies that have lied to him and to us for 3 years. They are setting him up for failure by hiding the extent of the disaster on the ground. The question we should be asking is not what deal can be made. The question is, why is the West pretending that a negotiated settlement which preserves the current regime in Kiev is even a possibility? To understand why the Mar-a-Lago meeting is theater played out over a graveyard, we must look past the headlines and look at the hard data coming from the front lines in the last 24 hours, data that signals the end of the Ukrainian state as we know it. But to truly grasp the magnitude of this sudden collapse, we have to understand the history of this moment. How did we get from stalemate to rout in such a short period? To truly understand the sudden terrifying velocity of the Russian advance we are seeing today, we must first strip away the thick layers of propaganda that have coated Western analysis for the last 2 years. The prevailing narrative in Washington and London has been obsessed with territory, measuring success by square kilometers gained or lost on a daily basis. This metric was always flawed, a fundamental misunderstanding of Russian military strategy and the nature of the conflict itself. Since the catastrophic failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer of 2023, and arguably as far back as the fall of Bakhmut, Moscow has not been fighting a war of territorial conquest. They have been fighting a classic brutal war of attrition. The objective was never the dirt. The objective was the systematic destruction of the enemy army. History provides the perfect blueprint for understanding what is happening right now. Consider the American Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg is often cited by historians as the turning point. When the South failed at Gettysburg, the war was effectively lost strategically. However, the fighting continued for nearly 2 more years. It was a long, bloody grind toward an inevitable conclusion, a period where the Confederacy was slowly bled dry until it could no longer field an effective fighting force. Similarly, look at the Eastern Front in World War II. The Battle of Kursk in 1943 marked the definitive end of German offensive capability in the east. Once the Wehrmacht broke its teeth on the Soviet defenses at Kursk, they never regained the strategic initiative. Yet it took the Red Army 2 more years of grinding, high-intensity combat to reach Berlin and grind the German military into dust. The outcome was decided in 1943, but the execution of that outcome took time. We are seeing a parallel dynamic in Ukraine today. The Kursk moment for Ukraine was likely that failed 2023 offensive, where billions of dollars of Western equipment burned in the minefields of Zaporizhia. Or perhaps it was the meat grinder of Bakhmut, where Kiev sacrificed its best brigades for a political symbol rather than a military necessity. Since then, we have been in the grinding phase. The Russians have been methodical, almost surgical. They have used their superior artillery, air power, and immense industrial depth to degrade the Ukrainian military machine piece by piece, day by day. For a long time, this looked like a stalemate to the uneducated observer or the hopeful politician. The lines weren't moving much on the map, but behind those static lines, the Ukrainian army was bleeding out. Their experienced officers were killed in droves. Their NATO-trained NCOs, the backbone of any modern army, were decimated. Their equipment stockpiles were depleted faster than the West could replenish them. I have argued for months that attrition is cumulative. It works slowly, and then it works all at once. It is like a dam holding back a river. At first, small hairline cracks appear, but the structure holds. Water seeps through, but the wall stands. Then structural integrity fails catastrophically, and the water rushes through in a torrent. We are now past the cracking stage. We are watching the dam burst. The West ignored the math. We ignored the disparity in population between a nation of 140 million and a nation of less than 30 million. We ignored the fact that Russia produces more artillery shells in a month than the collective West produces in a year. We told ourselves that spirit, morale, and Western values would somehow overcome the hard physics of war. They have not. The acceleration we are witnessing now, towns falling in days rather than months, is the direct result of this accumulated attrition. The Ukrainian army has simply run out of men to plug the gaps. They have run out of reserves to rotate into the line. The elastic defense is snapping because there is no more elasticity left in the system. This historical context is vital because it explains why the sudden speed of the Russian advance is not a fluke or a temporary surge. It is the mathematical inevitability of a war of attrition reaching its terminal phase. The enemy is broken and the victor is now moving to consolidate the win. And the evidence of this terminal phase is starkly visible on the map of the southern and central Donbas fronts right now. Let us strip away the rhetoric and look at the ground truth. In the last 24 to 48 hours, the tactical map of eastern Ukraine has shifted more dramatically than at any point in the last full year of combat. This is not speculation. This is hard reality confirmed by geolocated footage, drone surveillance, and panic-stricken reports from both Russian sources and honest Western observers who can no longer hide the disaster. First, turn your attention to the Zaporizhia sector in the south. For 2 years, this front was largely static, a frozen line of contact. That freeze is over. The town of Stepnohirsk has effectively fallen in the last 24 hours. To the layman, this might just be a name on a map, but tactically, it is critical. The loss of Stepnohirsk unhinges the entire defensive line protecting the approaches to the city of Zaporizhia itself. The Russians are moving forward here, threatening the vital logistics hubs that sustain the entire southern front. But the most significant and terrifying development is slightly to the east, at Huliaipole or Huliaipole. I have been watching this town for a long time. It was not just a town, it was a fortress. It was the linchpin of the Ukrainian defense in the south, fortified with concrete and steel. For over 2 years, it held against every Russian probing attack. It was supposed to be impregnable. Yesterday, Julian Rupke, the defense analyst for the German tabloid Bild, a man who is aggressively pro-Ukrainian and often echoes Kiev's talking points, posted a stunning admission. He noted that Huliaipole has effectively fallen. The Russians have captured it. But what is truly terrifying for the command in Kiev is the timeline. Rupke noted that the battle for this fortress city, home to 12,000 people and fortified for years, lasted only 4 weeks. Think about the implications of that timeline. The battle for Bakhmut took nearly a year of grinding house-to-house combat. Avdiivka took months of intense bombardment. Huliaipole fell in 4 weeks against what Rupke described as inferior Ukrainian defenders. This confirms exactly what I have been warning about. The quality and quantity of Ukrainian troops holding these vital fortresses have degraded to the point of systemic collapse. Moving north to the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad axis, often referred to in military reports as the Prolograd conglomeration, the situation is even worse. The town of Mirnohrad has effectively fallen. The defensive pocket we identified on this show a month ago, where we estimated 6,000 to 10,000 Ukrainian troops were at risk of operational encirclement, has been liquidated. The Ukrainian command faced a binary choice: withdraw these men to fight another day, or order them to hold ground to maintain political appearances for their Western donors. Predictably, they chose the latter. And now those troops are gone, killed, wounded, or captured in a cauldron of fire. The fields south of Mirnohrad are now under total Russian control. The pocket never formed a breakout. It was simply crushed by superior firepower. We must also address the leadership failure and the lies that led to this slaughter. Just a few weeks ago, General Syrskyi claimed that towns like Profres were still under Ukrainian control. He told the world not to listen to Russian propaganda. Today, we have visual confirmation that those towns are deep in the Russian rear. Syrskyi lied to the world, and he lied to his own troops. Because he lied, his men were left in a cauldron without support, believing help was coming when none existed, and now they are dead. The town of Rodinsky has also fallen. Seladov is gone. The Russians have swept through these areas, taking village after village in a single day. There is no counterattack. There is no pushback. The red arrows on the map are only moving in one direction, west. This is what picking up the pace looks like in a war of attrition. It is the collapse of organized resistance in key sectors. There is no strategic reserve left to plug these holes. When you look at this map, you are not looking at a stalemate. You are looking at an army experiencing systemic failure. But if the battlefield situation is dire, the political signal coming from Moscow is even more ominous. While the front lines are physically collapsing in the Donbas, the rhetorical and political landscape in Moscow has shifted in a way that Washington and the West need to understand immediately. This is no longer just about geography, it is about intent. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin addressed the Russian people and the military establishment. But for those of us who study the Russian mindset, it wasn't just what he said, it was how he looked. For only the third time in recent memory, and certainly the first time in this specific context since the conflict began, Putin appeared wearing a military-style tunic. This is not a casual fashion choice. In the deep traditions of Russian statecraft, this is a profound signal. It signifies that the leadership is on a total war footing, that the country is fully mobilized psychologically and industrially, and that the time for diplomatic niceties and strategic ambiguity is over. He is telling his people and his enemies that he is acting as a wartime commander-in-chief who is prepared for the long haul. Listen closely to the specific words he chose because they represent a departure from previous policy. He stated explicitly, "Our interest in the withdrawal of Ukrainian military formations from the territories they currently occupy is effectively reduced to zero." Let's parse the strategic weight of that sentence. For 2 years, the Kremlin's position was that negotiations were possible if Ukraine simply withdrew from the 4 annexed oblasts. It was an offer of a settlement, a harsh one, yes, but a settlement nonetheless. Now, Putin is saying that interest is zero. He is telling the West that the window for a negotiated withdrawal has slammed shut. He went further, stating with chilling clarity, "If the Kiev authorities do not wish to end the matter peacefully, we will resolve all the tasks facing us in the course of the special military operation by armed means." This is an ultimatum. It is no longer negotiate or we fight. It is capitulate or be destroyed. Putin is looking at the same maps we just analyzed. He sees the acceleration of his forces. He sees the exhaustion and depletion of the enemy. He has calculated that he no longer needs to offer concessions to get what he wants. He can simply take it by force. The strategic ambiguity is gone. Moscow views the Western leadership, including the incoming administration in the United States, as detached from reality. They are tired of the 10-point plans, the theatrical peace summits in Switzerland, and the delusion of Zelensky. They have decided to solve this on the battlefield. This speech was timed with precision to coincide with the meeting at Mar-a-Lago. It is a direct message to Donald Trump. Do not bother coming to me with half measures. Do not come to me with a freeze along the current lines. I am winning. My patience is exhausted, and I am prepared to go all the way. The implications of this are terrifying for the future of Ukraine. It means that Russia is likely preparing to expand the war goals beyond the Donbas. If negotiations are off the table, then the demilitarization of Ukraine will be achieved not by treaty, but by the total destruction of the Ukrainian state's capacity to wage war. We are watching a fundamental shift from a limited military operation designed to force a political outcome to a war of conquest designed to eliminate a security threat permanently. And if the West does not recognize this shift, we risk escalating this into a catastrophe that goes far beyond the borders of Ukraine, triggering scenarios that we have not had to contemplate since the height of the Cold War. This brings us to the most dangerous strategic precipice we have faced since the beginning of this conflict. The battlefield is physically collapsing, and Moscow has signaled clearly that it is done talking. So what happens when President Trump attempts to intervene in a war that is already militarily decided? There are two distinct scenarios here, and both are fraught with extreme risk. The first scenario is that Trump is finally presented with honest intelligence. His military advisors sit him down, strip away the neoconservative wishful thinking, and show him the unvarnished maps of Huliaipole and Pokrovsk. They explain the hard math. The Ukrainian army has no manpower left to recruit, and its best units are decimated. If Trump acts rationally, and I believe his primary instinct is to avoid being associated with losing wars, he will realize that underwriting failure is bad business. He may issue an ultimatum of his own to Zelensky. Take the best deal you can get right now, or we are out entirely. But here is the danger of that approach. The best deal Zelensky can get today is significantly worse than the deal he could have secured 6 months ago, and it is infinitely worse than the neutral status he foolishly rejected in Istanbul in 2022. And as we just established in the previous chapter, Vladimir Putin may not even accept that deal anymore. The price of peace has gone up because the cost of the war has been paid in Russian blood. This leads to the second and far more volatile scenario. President Trump, unwilling to look weak on the world stage and eager to show he can fix things through strength, might try to escalate the conflict to force Putin back to the negotiating table. We could see a push to provide even longer-range missiles, or perhaps even more direct Western involvement, in a desperate attempt to gain leverage. This would be a fatal miscalculation. You cannot buy leverage with weapon systems that arrive too late, in too few numbers, and without trained crews to operate them. If the United States escalates now in the face of a crumbling Ukrainian front, Russia will not back down. They view this war as existential. Instead, they will escalate horizontally. They will strike the logistics hubs in western Ukraine that they have previously spared. They may even begin to target NATO assets that are providing targeting intelligence. We would be climbing an escalation ladder that leads nowhere but to disaster. Furthermore, we must consider the sword of Damocles hanging over the battlefield, the Russian strategic reserves. Ukrainian intelligence reports and Western observations suggest there are hundreds of thousands of fresh Russian troops currently stationed near the Eastern Front that have not yet been committed to the fight. These are the strategic reserves Moscow has been building for this exact moment. If the Ukrainian lines continue to thin out, if they continue to strip troops from the north to plug the hemorrhaging holes in the south, Russia could unleash these reserves in a massive concentrated offensive. It would be, as the saying goes, like punching an armored fist through a wet paper bag. A breakthrough of that magnitude would not just take territory, it would shatter the operational cohesion of the entire Ukrainian military command structure. We are looking at the potential for a cascading collapse that rolls the front line all the way back to the Dnieper River. If that happens, Ukraine as a viable state ceases to function. And if the West tries to intervene to stop that collapse kinetically, there is nothing the United States can do to stop it short of initiating World War III. The danger of the Mar-a-Lago meeting is that it generates false hope. False hope prolongs the fighting, and prolonging the fighting now only ensures that the final defeat will be more total, more humiliating, and more destructive for the Ukrainian people. It is a tragedy of delays where every day of denial is paid for with lives that cannot be replaced. This human cost is not just a statistic. It is a stain on the conscience of the West, and its ripple effects are already being felt far beyond the battlefield. We must now pause our strategic analysis to confront the grotesque human reality of this disaster. For too long, the collective West has treated this war as a sterile geopolitical game, a convenient mechanism to weaken Russia and drain its resources without risking a single drop of American or British blood. We speak of capabilities and leverage in air-conditioned offices, but the blood being spilled in the Donbas is real, it is warm, and the moral stain of this policy is permanent. The facade of optimism is finally cracking, even among the most ardent supporters of the war. Sean Bell, a military analyst for Sky News who has served as a virtual cheerleader for Kiev's military prowess for 2 years, recently returned from a trip to Ukraine. He did not come back with stories of defiance or imminent victory. Instead, he returned with a somber, deeply unsettling report. He described the mood in Kiev not as resilient, but as exhausted. He spoke vividly of the flags at Maidan Square, a sea of blue and yellow tributes to the fallen that has grown so large it is now a physical manifestation of national grief. Bell admitted on air that the sense of inevitable victory, the narrative that sustained the West for so long, is gone. He stated, "Do they now feel that their victory is inevitable? No. There is a sense of weariness, a sense of loss." He acknowledged what we have known for months, that negotiations are necessary even if the political leadership cannot yet bring themselves to say it publicly. When the very propagandists who sold you this war start telling you it is lost, you know the situation is beyond repair. The profound tragedy here is that this was entirely avoidable. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men, fathers, husbands, sons have been sacrificed in pockets like Mir-a-Lago, Bakhmut, and Huliaipole for absolutely no strategic gain. They were not fighting to save their country. They were ordered to hold indefensible positions to create the illusion of strength for Western donors. They were treated as renewable resources in a cynical PR campaign designed to keep the money flowing from Washington and Brussels. We are watching a nation commit demographic suicide at the behest of foreign powers who will not fight for them. The population of Ukraine has plummeted. The birth rate has collapsed to one of the lowest levels in the world. A generation of men, the very people needed to rebuild the country when the guns fall silent, is gone. They are buried under those flags in Maidan, or they have fled, never to return. And we must ask, for what? To delay the inevitable by a few months? To allow defense contractors in Virginia and Maryland to hit their quarterly earnings targets? To allow politicians to avoid admitting they were wrong before the next election cycle? The global impact of this is not just about NATO credibility or the price of energy. It is about the physical destruction of a European nation. The longer Washington and Brussels pretend that a military victory is possible, the more flags will be planted in the cold ground of Kiev. The Russians are not going to stop because we ask them nicely. They view this conflict as an existential threat to their survival. They will fight until that threat is removed, regardless of the cost. The West's refusal to acknowledge this reality is not support for Ukraine. It is complicity in its destruction. The people in eastern Ukraine, the civilians and soldiers standing in the path of the Russian steamroller, are paying the ultimate price for Western hubris. And as the front moves inexorably west, that price is only going to rise. It is time to stop the killing. So, what is the conclusion we must draw from this grim tableau? We have arrived at the end of the line. The highly publicized meeting at Mar-a-Lago between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky is, in the grand strategic sense, a sideshow. It is a media event superimposed over a military catastrophe. While the cameras flash in Florida, the front lines in the Donbas are dissolving. The disconnect between the political theater in the West and the kinetic reality in the East has never been wider, and the consequences of that gap are about to become impossible to ignore. The facts on the ground are now indisputable, even to those who have spent years denying them. The Russian advance is not just continuing, it is accelerating. Key fortresses like Huliaipole and Mir-a-Lago, which were fortified for nearly a decade and held for 2 years of high-intensity combat, are now falling in a matter of weeks. The Ukrainian army is exhausted, depleted of manpower, and facing operational encirclement in multiple sectors simultaneously. The elastic defense has snapped. Furthermore, we must not ignore the signal sent from Moscow. Vladimir Putin has donned his military uniform and stated clearly that the time for diplomatic maneuvering is over. He is no longer seeking a negotiated off-ramp. He is seeking a military resolution. He has mobilized the Russian state for a decisive conclusion, and he has the industrial and demographic capacity to achieve it. History tells us clearly how this ends. It ends when the weaker power can no longer sustain the field. We are dangerously close to that moment. The collapse is not coming, it is here. If President Trump genuinely wishes to end this war and stop the slaughter, he cannot do it by bluffing. He cannot do it by promising weapons that do not exist or threatening to use leverage he does not have. The era of intimidating Russia with sanctions or empty rhetoric is over. Trump must look Zelensky in the eye and tell him the brutal, unvarnished truth. The war is lost. The only moral course of action remaining is to save the lives of the men still left in the trenches by seeking terms immediately, regardless of how harsh those terms may be. If he decides to listen to the neoconservatives in Washington and double down, or if he attempts to kick the can down the road to save face, then the Russian army will solve the problem for him. And they will do it by marching to the Dnieper River, destroying what remains of the Ukrainian military in the process, and leaving a trail of destruction that will take a century to heal. The choice is no longer between victory and defeat. It is between the survival of the Ukrainian nation in some truncated form or its complete erasure as a functional state. Do not be fooled by the optimistic headlines coming out of Florida today. Do not be swayed by the promises of secret plans or strength. Watch the map. Watch the red arrows moving west. That is where history is being written, and it is being written in blood. We will continue to monitor the situation on the ground with the honesty you deserve. If sanity prevails, we will let you know. If, as I fear, the delusions continue, we will be here to chronicle the consequences. Stay critical, stay informed, and always look at the reality, not the rhetoric.